Shoeless Joe Jackson Comes to Iowa by W. P. Kinsella. My father said he saw him years later playing in a 10th-rate commercial league in a textile town in Carolina, wearing shoes and an assumed name. He'd put on 50 pounds and the spring was gone from his step in the outfield, but he could still hit. Oh, how that man could hit. No one has ever been able to hit like Shoeless Joe. 2 years ago at dusk on a spring evening, when the sky was robin eggs blue and the wind as soft as a day-old chick, as I was sitting on the veranda of my farm home in eastern Iowa, a voice very clearly said to me, "If you build it, he will come." The voice was that of a ballpark announcer. As he spoke, I instantly envisioned the finished product I knew I was being asked to conceive. I could see the dark, squarish speakers, like ancient sailors' hats, attached to aluminum-painted light standards that glowed down into a baseball field, my present position being directly behind home plate. In reality, all anyone else could see out there in front of me was a tattered lawn of mostly dandelions and quackgrass that petered out at the edge of a cornfield perhaps 50 yards from the house. Anyone else was my wife Annie, my daughter Karen, a corn-colored collie named Carmelita Pope, and a cinnamon and white guinea pig named Junior, who ate spaghetti and sang each time the fridge door opened. Karen and the dog were not quite 2 years old. "If you build it, he will come," the announcer repeated in a scratchy Middle American, as if his voice had been recorded on an old 78 RPM record. A 3-hour lecture or a 500-page guidebook could not have given me clearer directions. Dimensions of ballparks jumped over me and around me like fleas. Cost figures for light standards and floodlights whirled about my head like the moss that dusted against the porch light above me. That was all the instruction I ever received. 2 announcements and a vision of a baseball field. I sat on the veranda until the satiny dark was complete. A few curdly clouds striped the moon, and it became so silent I could hear my eyes blink. Our house is one of those massive old farm homes, square as a biscuit box with a sagging veranda on 3 sides. The floor of the veranda slopes so that marbles, baseballs, tennis balls, and ball bearings all accumulate in a corner, like a herd of cattle clustered with their backs to a storm. On the north veranda is a wooden porch swing where Annie and I sit on humid August nights. We sip lemonade from teary glasses and dream. When finally I went to bed, and after Annie inched into my arms in that way she has, like a cat that you suddenly find sound asleep in your lap, I told her about the voice, and I told her that I knew what it wanted me to do. "Oh, love," she said, "if it makes you happy, you should do it." And she found my lips with hers, and I shivered involuntarily as her tongue touched mine. Annie. Never once has she called me crazy. Just before I started the first landscape work, as I stood looking out at the lawn and the cornfield and wondering how it could look so different in daylight, considering the notion of accepting it all as a dream and abandoning it, Annie appeared at my side and her arm circled my waist. She leaned against me and looked up, cocking her head like one of the red squirrels that scamper along the power lines from the highway to the house. "Do it, love," she said, as I looked down at her, that slip of a girl with the hair the color of cayenne pepper, and at least 1,000,000 freckles on her face and arms. That girl who lives in blue jeans and T-shirts and at 24 could still pass for 16. I thought back to when I first knew her. I came to Iowa to study. She was the child of my landlady. I heard her one afternoon outside my window as she told her girlfriends, "When I grow up, I'm going to marry..." And she named me. The others were going to be nurses, teachers, pilots, or movie stars, but Annie chose me as her occupation. She was 10. 8 years later, we were married. I chose willingly, lovingly to stay in Iowa, eventually rented this farm, bought this farm operating at 1 inch from bankruptcy. I don't seem meant to farm, but I want to be close to this precious land, for Annie and me to be able to say, "This is ours." Now I stand ready to cut into the cornfield, to chisel away a piece of our livelihood to use as dream currency. And Annie says, "Oh, love, if it makes you happy, you should just do it." I carry her words in the back of my mind, stored the way a maiden aunt might wrap up a brooch. a remembrance of long-lost love. I understand how hard it was for her to say, and how it got harder as the project advanced. How she must have told her family not to ask me about the baseball field I was building, because they stared at me dumb-eyed, a row of silent, thick-set peasants with red faces. Not an imagination among them except to forecast the wrath of God that will fall on the heads of pagans such as I. He, of course, was Shoeless Joe Jackson. Joseph Jefferson Shoeless Joe Jackson, born Brandon Mills, South Carolina, 16 July 1887. Died Greenville, South Carolina, 5 December 1951. In April 1945, Ty Cobb picked Shoeless Joe as the best left fielder of all time. He never learned to read or write. He created legends with a bat and a glove. He wrote records with base hits, his pen a bat, his book history. Was it really a voice I heard? Or was it perhaps something inside me making a statement that I did not hear with my ears, but with my heart? Why should I want to follow this command? But as I ask, I already know the answer. I count the loves of my life: Annie, Karen, Iowa, baseball. The great God, baseball. My birthstone is a diamond. When asked, I say my astrological sign is the hit and run, which draws a lot of blank stares here in Iowa, where 30,000 people go out to see the University of Iowa Hawkeyes football team, while 30 regulars, including me, watch the baseball team perform. My father, I've been told, talked baseball statistics to my mother's belly while waiting for me to be born. My father, born Glen Ulla, North Dakota, 14 April 1896. Another diamond birthstone. Never saw a professional baseball game until 1919 when he came back from World War I, where he was gassed at Passchendaele. He settled in Chicago, where he inhabited a room above a bar across from Comiskey Park, and quickly learned to live and die with the White Sox. He died a little when, as prohibitive favorites, they lost the 1919 World Series to Cincinnati. He died a lot the next summer when 8 members of the team were accused of throwing that World Series. Before I knew what baseball was, I knew of Connie Mack, John McGraw, Grover Cleveland Alexander, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Tris Speaker, Tinkers to Evers to Chance, and of course, Shoeless Joe Jackson. My father loved underdogs, cheered for the Brooklyn Dodgers and the hapless St. Louis Browns, loathed the Yankees, which I believe is an inherited trait, and insisted that Shoeless Joe was innocent, a victim of big business and crooked gamblers. That first night, immediately after the voice and the vision, I did nothing except sip my lemonade a little faster and rattled the ice cubes in my glass. The vision of the baseball park lingered, swimming, swaying, seeming to be made of red steam, though perhaps it was only the sunset. There was a vision within the vision. One of Shoeless Joe Jackson playing left field. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who last played Major League Baseball in 1920 and was suspended for life, along with 7 of his compatriots, by Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis for his part in throwing the 1919 World Series. He hit .375 against the Reds in the 1919 World Series and played errorless ball, my father would say, scratching his head in wonder. Instead of nursery rhymes, I was raised on the story of the Black Sox scandal. And instead of Tom Thumb or Rumpelstiltskin, I grew up hearing of the 8 disgraced ball players: Weaver, Ciccati, Risberg, Felsch, Gandil, Williams, McMullen, and always Shoeless Joe Jackson. 12 hits in an 8-game series, and they suspend him, my father would cry. And Shoeless Joe became a symbol of the tyranny of the powerful over the powerless. The name Kennesaw Mountain Landis became synonymous with the devil. It is more work than you might imagine to build a baseball field. I laid out a whole field, but it was there in spirit only. It was only left field that concerned me. Home plate was made from pieces of cracked 2x4 embedded into the earth. The pitcher's mound rocked like a cradle when I stood on it. The bases were stray blocks of wood, unanchored. There was no backstop or grandstand, only one shaky bleacher beyond the left field wall. There was a left field wall, but there was only about 50 feet of it, 12 feet high, stained dark green and braced from the rear. And the left field grass. My intuition told me that it was the grass that was important. It took me 3 seasons to hone that grass to its proper texture, to its proper color. I made trips to Minneapolis and 1 or 2 other cities where the stadiums still have natural grass infields and outfields. I would arrive hours before a game and watch the groundskeepers groom the fields like a prize animal, and then stay after the game when in the cool of the night the same groundsmen appeared with hose, rakes, hoses, and they patched the grasses like medics attending wounded soldiers. I pretended to be building a little league ball field and asked their secrets, and sometimes was told. I took interest in their total operation. They wouldn't understand it if I told them I was only building a left field. 3 seasons I've spent seeding, watering, fussing, praying, coddling that field like a sick child until it glows parrot green, cool as mint, soft as moss, lying there like a cashmere blanket. I began watching it in the evenings, sitting on the rickety bleacher just beyond the fence, a bleacher I had constructed for an audience of 1. My father played some baseball, Class B teams in Florida and California. I found his statistics in a dusty minor league record book. In Florida, he played for a team called the Angels, and by his records was a better-than-average catcher. He claimed to have visited all 48 states and every major league ballpark before, at age 40, he married and settled down a 2-day drive from the nearest major league team. I tried to play, but ground balls bounced off my chest and fly balls dropped between my hands. I might have been a fair designated hitter, but the rule was too late in coming. There is a story of the urchin who, tugging at Shoeless Joe Jackson's sleeve as he emerged from the Chicago courthouse, said, "Say it ain't so, Joe." Jackson's reply reportedly was, "I'm afraid it is, kid." When he comes, I won't put him on the spot by asking. The less said, the better. It is likely that he did accept some money from gamblers, but throw the series? Never. Shoeless Joe led both teams in hitting in that 1919 series. It was the circumstances. The circumstances. The players were paid peasant salaries while the owners became rich. The infamous 10-day clause, which voided contracts, could end any player's career without compensation, pension, or even a ticket home. The second spring, on a toothache May evening, a covering of black clouds lumbered off westward like ghosts of buffalo, and the sky became a cold color of silver coin. The forecast was for frost. The left field grass was like green angora, soft as a baby's cheek. In my mind I could see it dull and crisp, bleached by the frost, and my chest tightened. Then I used a trick a groundskeeper in Minneapolis taught me, saying it was taught to him by grape farmers in California. I carried out a hose and, making the spray so fine it was scarcely more than fog, sprayed the soft, shaggy spring grass all that chilled night. My hands ached and my own face became wet and cold, but as I watched, the spray froze on the grass, enclosing each blade in a gossamer crystal coating of ice, a covering that served like a coat of armor to dispel the real frost that was set like a weasel upon killing in the night. I seemed to stand taller than ever before as the sun rose, turning the ice into eye-dazzling droplets, each a prism, making the field an orgy of rainbows. Annie and Karen were at breakfast when I came in, the bacon and coffee smells and her laughter pulling me like a magnet. "Did it work, love?" Annie asked, and I knew she knew by the look on my face that it did. And Karen, clapping her hands and complaining of how cold my face was when she kissed me, love every second of it. "And how did he get the name like Shoeless Joe?" I would ask my father, knowing full well the story but wanting to hear it again. And no matter how many times I heard it, I could still picture a lithe ball player, his great bare feet, white as baseballs, sinking into the outfield grass as he sprinted for a line drive. And then, after the catch, his toes gripping the grass like claws, he would brace and throw into the infield. It wasn't the least bit romantic, my dad would say. When he was still in the minor leagues, he bought a new pair of spikes, and they hurt his feet. About the 6th inning, he took them off and played the outfield in just his socks. The others kidded him, called him Shoeless Joe, and the name stuck for all time. It was hard for me to imagine that a sore-footed young outfielder taking off his shoes one afternoon not long after the turn of the century could create such a legend. I came to Iowa to study, one of those thousands of faceless students who pass through large universities. But I fell in love with Iowa. Fell in love with the land, the people, the sky, the cornfields, and Annie. Couldn't find any work in my field, took what I could get. For years, each morning I bathed and frosted my cheeks with aqua velva, donned a 3-piece suit and a snap-brim hat, and feeling like Superman emerging from a telephone booth, set forth to save the world from a lack of life insurance. I loathed the job so much that I did it quickly, urgently, almost violently. It was Annie who got me to rent the farm. It was Annie who got me to buy it. I operate it the way a child fits together his first puzzle, awkwardly, slowly, but when a piece slips into the proper slot with pride and relief and joy. I built the field and I waited, and waited, and waited. "It will happen, honey," Annie said when I stood shaking my head at my folly. "People look at me. I must have a nickname in town." But I could feel the magic building like a storm gathering. It felt as if small animals were scurrying through my veins. I knew it was going to happen soon. "There's someone on your lawn," Annie says to me, staring out at the orange-tinted dusk. I can't see him clearly, but I can tell someone is there. She is quite right, at least about it being my lawn, although it is not in the strictest sense of the word a lawn, it is a left field. I watch Annie looking out. She is as soft as a butterfly, Annie is, with an evil grin and a tongue that travels at the speed of light. Her jeans are painted to her body, and her pointy little nipples poke at the front of a black t-shirt with the single word "Raw" emblazoned in waspish yellow capitals. Her red hair is short and curly. She has the green eyes of a cat. Annie understands, though it is me she understands and not always what is happening. She attends ball games with me and squeezes my arm when there's a hit, but her heart isn't in it, and she would just as soon be home. She loses interest if the score isn't close, or the weather warm, or the pace fast enough. To me it is baseball, and that is all that matters. It is the game that is important. The tension, the strategy, the ballet of the fielders, the angle of the bat. I have been more restless than usual this night. I have sensed the magic drawing close, hovering somewhere out in the night like a zeppelin, silky and silent, floating like the moon until the time is right. Annie peeks through the drapes. There is a man out there. I can see his silhouette. He is wearing a baseball uniform, an old-fashioned one. It's Shoeless Joe Jackson, I say. My heart sounds like someone flicking a balloon with her index finger. "Oh," she says. Annie stays very calm in emergencies. She band-aids bleeding fingers and toes and patches the plumbing with gum and good wishes. Staying calm makes her able to live with me. The French have the right words for Annie. She has a good heart. "Is he the Jackson on TV? The one you yell, 'Drop it, Jackson,' at?" Annie's sense of baseball history is not highly developed. "No, that's Reggie. This is Shoeless Joe Jackson. He hasn't played Major League Baseball since 1920. "Well, aren't you going to go out and chase him off your lawn or something?" Yes. What am I going to do? I wish someone else understood. My daughter has an evil grin and bewitching eyes. She climbs in my lap and watches television baseball with me. There's a magic about her. "I think I'll go upstairs and read a while," Annie says. "Why don't you invite Shoeless Jack in for coffee?" I feel the greatest tenderness towards her then, something akin to the rush of love the first time I held my daughter in my arms. Annie senses that magic is about to happen. She knows that she is not a part of it. My impulse is to pull her to me as she walks by, the denim of her thighs making tiny music. But I don't. She will be waiting for me, and she will twine her body about me and find my mouth with hers. As I step out on the veranda, I can hear the steady drone of the crowd, like bees humming on a white afternoon, and the voices of vendors, like crows cawing. A little ground mist, like wisps of gauze, snakes in a slow circular motion above the grass. The grass is soft as a child's breath, I say to the moonlight. On the porch wall I find a switch, and the single battery of floodlights I've erected behind the left field fence sputters to life. I've shaved it like a golf green, tended it like I would my own baby. It's been powdered and lotioned and loved. It is ready. Moonlight butters the whole Iowa night. Clover and corn smells are as thick as syrup. I experience a tingling like the tiniest of electric wires touching the back of my neck, sending warm sensations through me like the feeling of love. Then, as the lights flare, a scar against the blue-black sky, I see Shoeless Joe Jackson standing out in left field. His feet spread wide, body bent forward from the waist, hands on hips. He waits. There is the sharp crack of a bat, and Shoeless Joe drifts effortlessly a few steps to his left, raises his right hand to signal for the ball, camps under it for a second or two, catches the ball, at the same time transferring it to his throwing hand, and fires it to the infield. I make my way to left field, waiting in the darkness far outside the third baseline, behind where the third base stands would be. I climb up on the wobbly bleacher behind the fence. I can look right down on Shoeless Joe. He fields a single on one hop and pegs the ball to third. "How does it play?" I holler down. "The ball bounces true," he replies. I know. I'm smiling with pride, and my heart thumps mightily against my ribs. I've hit 1,000 line drives and as many grounders. It's as true as a felt-top table. "It is," says Shoeless Joe. "It is true." I lean back and watch the game. From where I sit, the scene is as complete as any of Major League Baseball parks I have ever attended. The two teams, the stands, the fans, the lights, the vendors, the scoreboard. The only difference is that I sit alone in the left field bleacher, and the only person that has substance is Shoeless Joe Jackson. When Joe's team is at bat, the left fielder below me is transparent, as if he was made of vapor. He performs mechanically, but does not seem to have facial features. We do not converse. A great amphitheater of grandstand looms dark against the sky. The park is surrounded by decks of floodlights, making it brighter than day. The crowd buzzes, the vendors hawk their wares, and I cannot keep the promise I made myself not to ask Shoeless Joe about the suspension and what it means to him. While the pitcher warms up for the third inning, we talk. It must have been like, but I can't find the words. Like having a part of me amputated, slick and smooth and painless. Like having an arm or a leg taken off with one swipe of a scalpel, big and blue as a sword. And Shoeless Joe looks up at me, and his dark eyes seem about burst with the pain of it. A friend of mine used to tell me about the war, how him and a buddy was running across a field when a piece of shrapnel took his friend's head off, and how the friend ran, headless, for several strides before he fell. I'm told that old men wake up in the night and scratch itchy legs that have been dust for 50 years. That was me. Years and years later, I'd wake in the night with the smell of the ballpark in my nostrils, and the cool of the grass on my feet, the thrill of the grass. How I wish my father could be here with me. He died before we had television in our part of the country. The very next year, he could have watched in grainy black and white as Don Larson pitched a no-hitter in the World Series. He would have loved hating the Yankees as long as they won that game. We were always going to go to a Major League Baseball game, he and I, but the time was never right. The money always needed for something else. One of the last days of his life, late in the night while I sat with him because the pain wouldn't let him sleep, the radio dragged in a staticky station broadcasting a White Sox game. We hunched over the radio and cheered them on, but they lost. Dad told the story of the Black Sox scandal for the last time. Told of seeing those 2 World Series games. Told of the way Shoeless Joe Jackson hit. Told of the dimensions of Comiskey Park, and how during the series the mobsters in striped suits sat in the box seats with their colorful women, watching the game and perhaps making plans to go out later and kill a rival. "You must go," he said. "I've been in all 16 Major League parks. I want you to go too. The summers belong to somebody else now, have for a long time." I nodded in agreement. "Hell, you know what I mean," he said, shaking his head. I did indeed. "I loved the game," Shoeless Joe went on. "I'd have played for food money. I'd have played for free and worked for food. It was the game, the parks, the smells, the sounds. Have you ever held a bat or a baseball to your face? The varnish, the leather. It was the crowd, the excitement of them rising as one when the ball is hit deep. The sound was like a chorus. There was the sound of the chug-a-lug of the Tin Lisa's in the parking lot, and the hotels with their brass spittoons in the lobbies and the brass beds in the rooms. Makes me tingle all over, like a kid on the way to his first doubleheader just to talk about it." The year after Annie and I were married, the year we first rented this farm, I dug Annie's garden for her, dug it by hand, stepping a spade into the soft black soil, ruining my salesman's hands. After I finished it, it rained. An Iowa spring rain as soft as a spray from a warm hose. The clods of earth I had dug seemed to melt until the garden leveled out, looking like a patch of black ocean. It was near noon on a gentle Sunday when I walked out to that garden. The soil was soft, my shoes disappeared as I plodded until I was near the center. There I knelt, the soil cool on my knees. I looked up at the low gray sky. The rain had stopped, and the only sound was the surrounding trees dripping fragrantly. Suddenly I thrust my hands wrist-deep into the snuffy black earth. The air was pure, all around me the clean smell of earth and water. Keeping my hands buried, I stirred the earth with my fingers, and I knew I loved Iowa as much as any man could love any piece of earth. When I came back to the house, Annie stopped me at the door and made me wait on the veranda, and then hosed me down as if I were a door with too many handprints on it, while I tried to explain my epiphany. It is very difficult to describe an experience of religious significance while you're being sprayed with a garden hose by a laughing, loving woman. "What happened to the sun?" Shoeless Joe says to me, waving his hand towards the banks of floodlights that surround the park. "Only stadium in the big leagues that doesn't have them is Wrigley Field," I say. "The owners found that more people could attend night games. They even play the World Series at night now." Joe purses his lips, considering. "It's harder to see the ball, especially at the plate." "When there are breaks, they usually go against the ball players, right? But I noticed you're 3 for 3 so far," I add, looking down at his uniform. The only identifying marks, a large S with an O in the top crook, an X at the bottom, and an American flag with 48 stars on his sleeve near the elbow. Joe grins. "I'd play for the Devil's own team just for the touch of a baseball. Hell, I'd play in the dark if I had to." I want to ask about that day in December of 1951. If he'd lasted a few more years, things might have been different. There was a move afoot to have his record cleared, but it died with him. I wanted to ask, but my instinct told me not to. There are things it is better not to know. It is one of those nights when the sky is close enough to touch, so close that looking up is like seeing my own eyes reflected in a rain barrel. I sit in the bleacher just outside the left field fence. I clutch in my hand a hot dog with mustard, onions, and green relish. The voice of the crowd roars in my ears like sea. Chords of the Star-Spangled Banner and Take Me Out to the Ball Game float across the field. A Coke bottle is propped up against my thigh, squat, greenish, the ice-cream-haired elf grinning conspiratorially from the cap. Below me in left field, Shoeless Joe glides over the plush velvet grass, silent as a jungle cat. He prowls, paces, crouches ready to spring as nearly 300 feet away the ball is pitched. At the sound of the bat, he wafts over in whatever direction is required as if he were on ball bearings. Then the intrusive sound of the screen door slamming reaches me, and I blink and start. I recognize it as the sound of the door to my house, and looking into the distance I can see the shape that I know is my daughter toddling down the back steps. Perhaps the light or the crowd has awakened her, and she has somehow eluded Annie. I judge the distance to the steps. I am just to the inside of the foul pole, which is exactly 330 feet from home plate. I tense. Karen will surely be drawn to the lights and the emerald dazzle of the infield. If she touches anything, I fear it will all disappear, perhaps forever. Then, as if she sees my discomfort, she stumbles away from the lights, walking in a ragged fringe of darkness well outside the third baseline. She trails a blanket behind her, one tiny fist rubbing a sleepy eye. She is barefoot and wears a white flannelette nightgown covered in an explosion of daisies. She climbs up in the bleacher, alternating a knee and a foot on each step, and crawls into my lap, silently, like a kitten. I hold her close and wrap the blanket around her feet. The play goes on. Her innocence has not disturbed the balance. "What is it?" she says shyly, her eyes indicating that she means all that she can see. "Just watch the left fielder," I say. "He'll tell you all you ever need to know about a baseball game. Watch his feet as the pitcher accepts the signs and gets ready to pitch. A good left fielder knows what pitch is coming, and he can tell from the angle of the bat where the ball is going to be hit, and if he's good, how hard." I look down at Karen. She cocks one sky-blue eye at me, wrinkling her nose, and then snuggles into my chest, the index finger of her right hand tracing tiny circles around her nose. The crack of the bat is sharp as the yelp of a kicked cur. Shoeless Joe whirls, takes 5 loping strides directly towards us, turns again, reaches up, and the ball smacks into his glove. The final batter dawdles in the on-deck circle. "Can I come back again?" Joe asks. "I built this left field for you. It is yours any time you want to use it. They play 162 games a season now." "There are others," he says. "If you were to finish the infield, well, old Chuck Gandil could play first base, and we'd have the Swede at shortstop and Buck Weaver at third." I can feel his excitement rising. We could stick McMullen in at second, and Cicotti and Lefty Williams would like to pitch again. Do you think you could finish the center field? It would mean a lot to Happy Felsch." "Consider it done," I say, hardly thinking of the time, the money, the back-breaking labor it entails. "Consider it done," I say again, and then stop suddenly as an idea creeps into my brain like a runner inching off first base. "I know a catcher," I say. "He never made the majors, but in his prime he was real good. Really good. Played Class B ball in Florida and California." "We could give him a try," says Shoeless Joe. "You give us a place to play and we'll look at your catcher." I swear the stars have moved in close enough to eavesdrop as I sit in this rickety bleacher that I built with my unskilled hands, looking down at Shoeless Joe Jackson. A breath of clover travels on the summer wind. Behind me, just yards away, brook water plashes softly in the darkness. A frog shrills. Fireflies dazzle the night like red pepper. A petal falls. "God, what an outfield," he says. "What a left field." He looks up at me and I look down at him. "This must be heaven," he says. "No," I reply automatically. "This is Iowa."